I descended the broken escalator, and that's when I saw him. He wasn't a typical homeless man. He wore an old, torn formal suit and sat on a metal bench, staring at a small knife he was skillfully flipping between his fingers. I tried to pretend I hadn't seen him. Then he spoke calmly. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. I was on a work trip in one of the cities of Eastern Europe, a place that felt like it was stuck in the 1980s. The hotel was unnaturally quiet, and the sound of the wind in the hallways made you feel like you were the only person in the building. And as usual, when loneliness meets free time, the mind starts searching for anything to fill the void. I opened a dating app, started scrolling through faces until I stopped at a profile of a guy named Stefan. His features were sharp, his eyes an unsettling shade of blue, and his photos gave the impression of someone cultured and refined. We started chatting, and Stefan was engaging, talking about art and classical music. He suggested we meet. He said, "I live in a quiet area away from the tourist noise. Let's meet at an old train station on the outskirts of the city." I didn't think twice. I was desperate to see something different from my cold hotel room. I took the last train heading to the outskirts. The farther it went, the fewer lights there were. I got off at a nearly abandoned station, where Stefan was waiting for me. In reality, he looked like a model, but there was something about the way he stood, something too rigid. The problem started when we began walking. In chat, he was fluent and lively, but in person, his silence felt like a graveyard. I tried to break the tension. "It's really quiet here. Have you lived here long?" He only nodded or gave faint smiles that never reached his eyes. Because of my constant need to be liked, I started talking more about myself, trying to make him laugh, trying to convince myself I hadn't made a mistake coming here. Suddenly, he pointed to a narrow dirt path and said, "My house is there, behind that small forest. I have a rare collection of records you'll love." We walked for what felt like forever until I lost track of time. We arrived at an old countryside mansion, its walls decayed and covered in creeping vines. The moment we stepped inside, I checked my phone. No signal. The house felt like a museum of dead things. Taxidermy animals in every corner. Heavy velvet furniture carrying the stench of decay. He led me into the kitchen. A large pot was boiling on the stove, releasing a sharp, metallic, nauseating smell, like rotten meat mixed with chemicals. We sat in the living room, and he began talking about his passion. "I'm a collector, and I restore wax figures." He said he had developed a technique to merge organic tissue with wax to make figures appear lifelike. I forced a tense smile and said, "That reminds me of the artist Maurizio Catalan." That's when everything changed. Stefan suddenly stood up and began shouting in a hoarse voice. "Catalan? That thief. He stole my research on tissue preservation. The world thinks he's a genius, but he's nothing but a grave robber of ideas." He started pulling out files and photos of wax figures. They looked disturbingly real. Their eyes looked like actual human eyes. I sat frozen, nodding along, feeling like I was the next piece in his collection. Suddenly, he calmed down as if nothing had happened. He leaned in and kissed me, a cold, dry kiss like reptile skin. Then he said in a strange tone, "I need to go upstairs to prepare something special for you. Don't move." He went upstairs. Minutes passed. 10, 20, 40 minutes. The house began making strange noises, something heavy being dragged above, metal scraping against metal. I couldn't take it anymore. I went to the front door, locked with a massive iron lock. I ran to the kitchen. That door was blocked with nailed wooden planks. That's when it hit me. This isn't a date. This is a slaughterhouse. I started searching for anything, any knife, any object to defend myself. I imagined Stefan preparing the wax mold I would be placed in. After nearly an hour, Stefan came back down. He was wearing a long plastic apron and said coldly, "Now it's time to begin." I felt a kind of terror I had never experienced before. I said, "I'm sick. I need to go back. My phone isn't working, and my family will call the police." I asked for the Wi-Fi to send my location, a desperate lie. As I bent down near the modem, I saw him in an old wall mirror standing right behind me, slowly reaching for a long metal rod hidden behind a curtain. In a split second, I jumped, grabbed a heavy brass lamp beside me, and shouted, "Open the door now, or I'll kill you." He looked shocked. Maybe he didn't expect the prey to fight back. Calmly, he said, "Why are you so tense?" "The door is open." He led me to the kitchen, his hand inside the apron pocket. I thought he would pull out a knife, but instead, he took out an old key. He unlocked the door. The moment I felt the night air, I ran. I didn't run, I flew. 2 hours through forests and dark roads until I reached the station. I made it back to the hotel, still shaking. I blocked him everywhere and reported his account. To this day, whenever I see a wax figure in a museum, I feel a cold chill. And I wonder, how many people went to that forgotten suburb and never came back? And what exactly was Stefan preparing for me upstairs during that hour? There are certain kinds of people who send a chill down your spine the moment they walk into a room. That's exactly what happened when Ellen entered our lives. My mother, as kind as she always is, found herself almost forced into a friendship with this woman who had recently moved into our quiet suburban neighborhood in Oregon. Ellen appeared like a broken woman, carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. The very first time they met, without any introduction, Ellen burst into tears and told my mom a story that froze the blood in her veins. She said her young granddaughter, Lily, had died just 9 months earlier. She claimed that her son, Jake, went into the child's room to wake her up, only to find her lifeless in bed. She said the cause of death was sudden infant death syndrome. That was the moment something clicked in my mind. I study medicine, and I know that this condition only affects infants, and Lily was 4 years old. Children that age don't just die suddenly in their beds without a clear medical reason. I felt like there was something dark wrapped around the story, but I told myself, maybe it's grief, maybe she misunderstood the medical terms. Ellen wasn't just a grieving neighbor. She became a shadow that followed us everywhere. She inserted herself into every detail of our lives. But what was truly disturbing was her unsettling fixation on my little sister, Sarah, who is 4 years old, the exact same age as her deceased granddaughter. She would look at Sarah with hungry eyes, looks that went beyond affection into obsession. One time, while we were in the garden, I saw Ellen slowly approach my sister, and then she did something that made my skin crawl. She leaned in and deeply inhaled the scent of Sarah's hair, closing her eyes as if summoning something from the dead. She whispered hoarsely, "She smells exactly like Lily. Don't let her wander far, dear. Death takes beauty quickly." My mom told me Ellen often spoke about envying her and hinted at running from a dark past in Utah, something involving a strict cult and a mysterious person who had been chasing her. That's when I realized we weren't dealing with a grieving woman. We were dealing with a predator hiding behind the mask of a victim. A few hours ago, I was sitting with her son, Jake. He seemed calm, but his eyes were empty, as if his soul had left him long ago. He started showing me old photos of his family in Utah. Suddenly, he stopped at a picture of a little girl with bright eyes. It was Lily. He didn't know that I already knew the story. His mother had warned us not to bring it up because he suffers from PTSD. He stared at the photo and said in a trembling voice, "Everything fell apart that day. I was the one who found her." I asked calmly, "Where did you find her?" And that's when everything broke apart. Jake said, tears filling his eyes, "She was in the bathtub." Her face was underwater. She was so cold. I froze. His mother said she was found in bed. He says she was in the bathtub. Why lie? Why such a terrifying contradiction? If she drowned, then this wasn't sudden death, it was negligence. I started connecting the dots. Later, I found out that Child Protective Services, CPS, got involved immediately after Lily's death and removed her younger brother from the family. The question that keeps screaming in my head is, if the death was natural, as Ellen claims, why would the state take the other child? Authorities don't remove children from their families unless there's serious danger or criminal suspicion. Was Lily's death really an accident or something far darker? And why did Ellen flee Utah? Was she running from justice or from guilt she couldn't escape? I imagined Ellen around my little sister, Sarah, her strange touches, her obsession with scent. Was she trying to replace Lily with Sarah? Was she responsible for what happened in that bathtub? And now looking for another chance. Now, as I sit in my room, I watch Ellen from the window. She's standing by our garden fence, staring at my sister's bedroom window. The contradictions in her story aren't just confusion, they're cover. Jake is broken because he knows the truth. Ellen is strong because she knows how to hide it. My mother and I have decided to cut her off completely. But how do you cut off someone who believes you have something that belongs to them? Ellen doesn't see Sarah as a neighbor's child. She sees her as Lily returned from the grave. My advice to you, trust your instincts. If someone's story doesn't add up, or their gaze lingers too long on your children, don't wait until it's too late. We're changing the locks and preparing to leave, because I'm certain of one thing. Ellen won't let her new granddaughter go that easily. Evil doesn't always come as monsters. Sometimes it comes as a grieving grandmother, with a faint smile and an unfinished story. I always thought monsters hid in forests, but I discovered they prefer the neon lights of big cities. My name is Sarah, and I work as an auditor in an office tower in downtown Chicago. On a harsh winter night, Thanksgiving night, I had to stay until 2 a.m. to finish an annual budget. The building was nearly empty. My manager upstairs offered to order me an Uber at his expense, and my boyfriend, Adam, kept calling every 10 minutes insisting he'd come pick me up. But overwhelmed and suffocated by work stress, I decided to walk. There was a subway station about a 10-minute walk away, and I told myself the cold air would clear my mind. I said goodbye to the security guard and stepped outside. The streets were empty of people, but filled with the towering shadows of skyscrapers that, at night, looked like massive gravestones. That was my first step into a nightmare I couldn't have imagined. I reached the entrance of the old subway station, St. Jude. At that hour, there were no regular trains, and the lights flickered slowly. I descended the broken escalator, and that's when I saw him. He wasn't a typical homeless man. He wore an old, torn formal suit and sat on a metal bench. Staring at a small knife he was skillfully flipping between his fingers in a disturbingly precise way. I tried to pretend I hadn't seen him and stood at a distance, waiting for a train that might never come. Suddenly, he broke the silence in a calm voice, the kind of calm that comes before a storm. Has it passed 3? My watch stopped a long time ago. I looked at him cautiously. His eyes were sunken, and his skin was so pale that the veins on his face were visible. I replied briefly, "Yes, 3:05. He slowly stood up, his body making strange cracking sounds. He approached me with heavy steps and said, "Walking alone in a place like this gives the impression you're not afraid of death, and that's both attractive and irritating." I realized the train wasn't coming. I turned to go back up the stairs, but he was right behind me. He wasn't running, just walking slowly, as if he knew he'd catch me eventually. His voice grew slightly louder, echoing through the tunnel. "You know, Sarah, I don't like the noise of celebrations. People out there are laughing, and I'm here, hungry for something different." How did he know my name? A wave of terror froze me. Then I remembered my work badge hanging from my coat. He had been reading my information while following me. I pulled out my phone, battery nearly dead. I tried to call Adam, but there was no signal underground. I ran out to the street. He followed, calm and steady. He began whispering disgusting things about how he would audit me in his own way. He knew I was afraid, and he was enjoying it. I reached my neighborhood, but I was too scared to lead him to my ground floor apartment. I saw a large house with a front yard and a wooden fence. A dim light glowed from the kitchen. I jumped over the fence and pretended to search for my keys in front of the door. Loud enough for him to hear, I said, "Honey, open the door. I forgot my keys." I looked back. He stood by the fence, staring at me with a sick grin, dragging the blade of his knife along the wood. He knew it was a lie. He began climbing the fence slowly. My heart felt like it would stop. I knocked desperately on the stranger's door, trying to hold back tears. Then, I heard footsteps approaching from inside. The door swung open. A large man stood there, holding his phone. "Who are you? What are you doing here?" he shouted. Before I could answer, I pointed with my trembling hand toward the fence. The man was gone, as if he had vanished into the night. The homeowner called the police. Later, we found out the man was a serial stalker who had been seen around office buildings for weeks, targeting women who worked late and walked alone. Now, I don't walk alone, even in broad daylight, without looking over my shoulder. Adam still blames himself, and I still hear the sound of that man's body cracking in my nightmares. I changed my job. I moved to a new place. But I couldn't change one terrifying truth. In big cities, you're never truly walking alone. There's always another auditor watching your steps from shadows. The next time you decide to walk at night to clear your head, remember, someone might be waiting around the corner to settle their accounts with you. It was the fall of 2024 in a forgotten town on the edge of the northern forests. I had moved there seeking isolation after years of working in legal accounting. My house stood at the end of a dead-end street, and directly behind it began the Black Reserve, a dense pine forest where the air was always damp. That's where I started noticing him. He wasn't an ordinary man. He was part of the scenery, like an old street lamp. I called him the Gray Man. He wore a long, faded gray coat, his hat covering half his face, and he walked very slowly with a large mixed-breed dog whose fur was matted and whose eyes were dull. I would see him at 7 a.m. while making coffee, and again at 4 p.m. Sometimes he would stand for minutes in front of my house, not waiting for the dog, but staring at my balcony. At first, I thought he was just a lonely neighbor. One cold evening, I decided to break the silence. I asked him, "Did you receive the neighborhood maintenance notice?" He looked at me. His eyes carried a terrifying emptiness. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stared at my lips as they moved, as if studying how I spoke. Then he said, in a voice like dry leaves rustling, "I don't receive messages. I receive signals." Then he turned and walked away. That sentence echoed in my mind for days. What did he mean by signals? I broke up with my fiancée that winter. He left, taking with him every sense of security I had. Suddenly, the house I once loved felt too large, too cold. I began spending my nights in the backyard, staring at the forest, trying to forget my pain. My mother came to stay with me for 2 weeks. She was sharp and observant. On the 4th day, she said, "Maya, that gray man, he's not walking his dog. He's using the dog as an excuse to stand here." She noticed that every time I stepped onto the balcony, he would appear from around the corner. She tried greeting him from behind the fence, but he didn't respond. He just stood there, staring at her coldly. It made her shiver, and she told me something I'll never forget. "That man isn't sick, my daughter. He's waiting for your moment of weakness to take one step closer." After my mother left, the real nightmare began. I would sit outside at night, and start hearing sounds from deep within the trees. Footsteps, confident ones, sometimes approaching, sometimes retreating. Then things started disappearing. A lighter I left on the table. A book I had been reading outside. Even my favorite scarf that I had left on a wooden chair. I blamed myself. I thought I was losing my memory because of the breakup. But one day, my brother came over to help install some shelves. The gray man appeared as usual. He stopped at the garden entrance and let his dog approach my brother. Suddenly, my brother shouted, "What is that smell? Is there something dead around here?" The stench coming from the dog and the man's coat was unbearable. It smelled like damp earth or something long dead. When my brother told him to leave, he didn't move. He just stared at him as if memorizing his face for later. After that day, the man stopped walking down the street and started appearing somewhere else inside the forest. My friend Sarah moved in with me. One moonlit night, we saw the truth. We were sitting in complete darkness, looking toward the forest, when I noticed a faint glint between the dense trees. It wasn't animal eyes. It was the reflection of moonlight on glasses or something metallic. Sarah shouted recklessly, "We can see you. Leave us alone." Suddenly, we heard frantic movement in the woods, as if something had been crouching just meters away from us. The next morning, I followed the trail carefully. I found a spot hidden between thick branches, completely invisible from the outside, yet offering a perfect view of my bedroom and backyard. It was a human nest, rotten food scraps, piles of cigarette butts, the same brand I smoked, and worst of all, my missing scarf, hanging from a branch like a trophy. The gray man wasn't a neighbor. He was living in my forest, living in my shadow, breathing when I breathed, watching me at my weakest. Before I could call the police, something changed. The house next door, vacant for years, was suddenly bought by a large family with 3 big hunting dogs and strong men constantly around. On the first day they moved in, I saw the gray man one last time, standing at the edge of the forest. He watched the noise, the barking dogs, the movement of people. He realized his territory was no longer safe. He disappeared that evening and never returned. I spoke with the new neighbor and asked if they had found anything in the back area. He nodded and said, "We found a strange underground hideout filled with old clothes and cut-out magazine photos. Looks like someone spent hours down there watching this direction." He pointed directly at my window. I left that house in 2025. I can't stand living near forests anymore. And now, whenever I see a man in a faded coat walking slowly, I remember that smell, and I wonder, was he watching only me? Or are there more gray men hidden in the forests, waiting for a dead-end street?